right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sex Sells Podcast, the podcast where we talk about relationships, culture, dating, politics from a male and female perspective. And today, this is very different to our last podcast. We're talking about man babies, talking about men who can't get their act together and whether they are trash or not. We're going to get into that at the 3-minute mark. Before we do, big announcement. Mentioned this on the last podcast, but we now have a YouTube channel. You can discuss the podcast in the comments. Let me know whenever I say something wrong, which I'm sure I do every couple of podcasts. So go to youtube.com/@sexsalespodcast. youtube.com/@sexsalespodcast. I think just Sex Sells Podcast will work as well. But either way, that is the YouTube channel. Make sure you go and subscribe. The full podcasts for now will be uploaded to there in video format. We're also sponsored by Crush Organics. Crush Organics got a massive range of CBD oils and CBD oil products. Been using that diamond oil. I sleep like a baby. Very relaxing, very nice. Been using their pain cream as well. Helps with various ailments that I have. Man, I really don't have the body for physical work. I mean, I work out for an hour each day, and I have like the same ailments that a guy who's been working on the tools has after 20 years of brutal work. So, yeah, my body really wasn't cut out for physical work. And if you're like me and you got a few aches and pains and you're a bit of a modern, soft, emotional man, get yourself some Crush Organic CBD pain cream. And it will help relax those muscles. And use the code Neel. Use the code Neel. You get 40% off. Crushorganics.com. That's Crush with a K. Do you like to laugh? You're a psychopath if you don't. And if you like to laugh, come to Comedy Untamed. We have weekly shows in Sydney or Melbourne. So if you live in what are basically the two capitals of Australia, do come and see Comedy Untamed. We've got the best comedians in each of those cities. They're trying new material. They're doing polished sets. It's all very fun. It's all very chaotic. It's all very wild. The second half gets insane. Last week, we almost got a standing ovation, not to brag. We do all sorts of improv games and things like that. So comedyuntamed.com. We've also got some shows in Newcastle. We've got some shows in Geelong coming soon. And hopefully Brisbane sometime this year. I want to set up a weekly version of the show there. All right, man babies, let's get into it. Okay, so this, ironically enough, was my topic suggestion. And look, I've worked for myself most of my life, up until basically 2 or 3 years ago. I sort of loosely had professional relationships with maybe a manager or maybe a production company or something like that. But I've always just kind of worked for myself. And 2 or 3 years ago, I've made an effort to expand my production capacity and produce more and just expand my business operations. And I'm working with other people in greater capacity and getting to know them and figuring out various traits and attributes. And none of the people who currently work for me are like this, but there have been people who, maybe I trialed them or maybe worked with them for a limited amount of time. And, I always hated this, men are trash, they can't get their act together, they're all lazy and they don't do things in this day and age. Because I'd take that personally. I think, well, that doesn't relate to me. I like to think I've got my act together. Sure, I have my days where I'm less productive, or days where I need to be a bit lazy, and thankfully, because I work for myself, I have the ability to do that. But I think I'm relatively confident in saying that I've got my act together. But working with a lot of men in their mid-20s and late 20s, a lot don't. A lot are man babies. A lot just can't be consistent. They're not dependable. It's not like they're suppressing their feelings, at least in my experience, but they don't maybe have a lot of emotional intelligence. And have I been perfect? Absolutely not. There have been situations, especially more so in romantic relationships, and that's ironically the catalyst for this podcast. I felt like I just didn't know what I was doing, and I was hurting people emotionally, and I wanted to get better at it. And it is a learned skill in many ways, emotional intelligence. But yeah, just the stereotype neckbeard. I always think about this. The fact that that even is a stereotype is so condemning to the overall male gender, right? Because it's so fucking easy to shave your damn neckbeard. And the fact that that many of you aren't doing it, that it's become a stereotype, it's insufferable and it's really sad, to be honest. I don't want to, ironically enough, I don't want to be the one, thinking that, this is, I don't want to make it sound like this podcast is also just me trashing men or making it seem like men are the cause of all of society's problems or anything like that. But I do actually relate with some of these TikToks from women who are saying men need to get their act together, because I think a lot do. And I think I mentioned this on a few podcasts ago, where the sort of feminist sentiment or the progressive sentiment about men needing to get their act together and not held to a certain standard and not held accountable for their actions. And essentially, at least what I can hear in the subtext there is that men are not reaching their potential and are not becoming what they're capable of and contributing to society the way they could. But then you look at your Andrew Tate style extreme red pill neo-masculine types, and they're also saying, well, men are all lazy, they're watching porn all day, they don't have ambition, they're not confident. Now, they're not saying the exact same thing at all, but there does seem to be a Venn diagram of what they're saying, and in that little middle circle is that men are not living up to their potential, and men are not being the best versions of themselves. And there is this loose, implicit idea among secular millennials more than anything that this is demonstrable and observable in the men that we interact with. So that's the catalyst for what I wanted to talk about and what we can discuss today on this podcast. But I know you, when I messaged you saying that we should talk about man babies, you seemed very excited on the chat. So let me know what you think and what your experiences, but not only you, that what your friends' experiences might have been dealing with men who, can't get their act together or haven't gotten their act together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love this topic, not because it's a man-bashing topic, but I just find it really interesting, and to talk about especially the female version, cultural factors, etc. We can get into that later. But I myself do not have experience with a man baby because I do not have the time of day to date or interact, or previously was not in my realm. However, so many of my friends have dated or are dating or interacted with closely with a man-child. And
give me
it's
some
literally
examples.
just someone that doesn't know how to cook, doesn't know how to clean, maybe struggles, jumps from job to job, maybe no ambition. Those two are kind of sometimes. Little to no emotional maturity. Failure to see things from their point of view or empathy or perspective. There is the stereotype that they video game all day, which I have found actually to be kind of true in these aspects a lot. A lot of them are video gamers, which is interesting. I do love video games. Adrian once was a video gamer before a child, but he's not a man-child. And just a weaponized incompetence is a really big one, where basically someone will say, or your partner might say, like, can you make me a tea, or can you take the trash out, or can you do this? And it'll take days, or it'll take months, or it'll never happen. Or if it does happen, it's done so poorly or incorrectly that she just thinks, I may as well just do it myself. Or he'll be like, I don't know how. How do you do this? No, she'll just take over herself. And sometimes you find that the partner might be even taking on the traditional female and traditional male roles. So they might be cleaning the house, doing all the maintenance, doing all the cooking, the cleaning, but also mowing the lawn and taking out the trash and fixing the cars or putting up furniture themselves. So basically doing all the physical and emotional labor for their partners. And so when I look at friends or girls or even anyone I know that have dated men like this, and I mentioned this in the last podcast, you have to look at what is the secondary gain. Like, why were they like this when you first started dating them? Because 99 times out of 100, they were already like this. So why then did you go and date them knowing this? And I think is the key to this is at the start, or, women love to want to look after a man. Okay, I shouldn't say that's such a, don't screenshot that one sentence and put it on any video there because I'll get ripped online. But there's a difference between wanting to look after a man and needing to look after a man, or just a partner in general. And I think that they might find it endearing or just they're blinded by love, where they're like, I'll look after them and I'll do this and I'll do that. But then after a while, what is that person actually contributing to you or to your relationship? And what is the balance in this relationship? What is the balance of physical and emotional labor? So I think those are two really, really big things that people that date man-child's experience, that they are doing all the labor for this. I don't want to have to teach you or teach that person how to have a conversation, how to communicate without getting aggressive, how to do all these things. And I also don't want to have to cook every single meal, do every single load of laundry, do everything for the house. So it kind of falls into those little categories and factors that come up in these relationships, can be so detrimental long-term to these relationships. And I would say the only relationships like this that actually succeed are probably ones that have the cultural expectations that this is the way a functioning, healthy relationship is, where the woman might do A, B, C, and the man might do this or do nothing, and the man might communicate in an aggressive manner, and that's the culturally accepted way, in which case they may not see much of it as an issue because they've been brought up knowing that. The other thing that I think is important to kind of reflect on as well is what leads people or men to become like this. And cultural traditions or aspects aside, there's two schools of thoughts about this. One is that men, we've kind of talked about this on a recent podcast, that they don't have the opportunity in their childhood to have their emotions prioritized. So they don't learn to talk about their emotions and communicate effectively or be heard, so therefore they can't do it to other people and listen to their emotions or take on board their emotions. And in terms of being related to a man-child, that would be because another big aspect of it is that anytime this is what I hear and what I read as well, that when someone tries to communicate with a man-child, they get instantly defensive, instantly aggressive, failing to see the issue, or the woman puts up with it for so long that she finally explodes, and he goes, why is she becoming so hysterical? Or maybe she becomes critical or resentful, and then he gaslights her saying she's the problem. Anyway, the other school of thought as well, which I think is probably the most accurate one, or more likely, is that as a child, they weren't ever told that they were wrong. They were made to believe that they were always right. They probably had everything done for them, usually by their mother, all the cooking, all the cleaning, like, don't do that. And I saw this skit, I don't know if you've seen it, it was like viral on TikTok. And I saw it a while ago, so I can't remember it perfectly, but this comedian, she was talking about the way that a mother talks to her son, and she'll be like, don't do that, sweetie. Oh, you ran someone over, that's okay. Oh, I'll do this for you, I'll do that. And then the way a mother talks to her daughter, which was, honey, you've got cellulite. Or the shorts make you look fat. And everyone in the comments was relating to so much, which was really interesting to see how people saying this is so accurate to the way I saw my mum talk to my brother versus me.
Didn't have
yeah, those are my first initial little reflections on it.
You're absolutely right. This is one where there is a clear gender difference. I don't know a single man who's dated a woman who, can't iron a shirt or can't do just basic life skills, can't get to work on time, can't just do these just basic attributes of competency that really should have been instilled into you from your parents at age 5. I mean, things like brushing your teeth, basic hygiene. It's really, in most situations when it comes to men's issues, I want to be very empathetic and understand the broader cultural context and play devil's advocate and offer different ideas in comparison to maybe what the mainstream progressive narrative is. But these are situations where it's like, dude, you don't get any empathy if you're in your 30s and you can't iron a shirt. You don't get any empathy if you're in your late 20s and, you don't know how to cook anything other than 2-minute noodles. It's like, get it together. I wonder what these people's fathers think of them. Because if I had a son like that, I'd be ashamed. I'd literally be ashamed of my son. If my son was 25 and couldn't do these basic life skills, unless there's, a mental illness issue or something, some sort of other adventitious occurrence, then that would be different. But in most situations, I would quite literally be ashamed of my son. And I don't think that's a outlandish statement, because this is a modern phenomenon. Now, when we talk about, say, things like you were saying, emotional labor, traditionally men were not expected to do that. Men were not really trained to do that. But things like, taking out the trash or whatever, the basic housework duties that a man is expected to do, that is something that, in the traditional world, and I'm not talking too historically here, even just our parents and grandparents, the men were expected to do this, and if they didn't do that, there would be consequences. And then when you move into the more modern world and post-1970s, as boomers started to have children, and the self-esteem phenomenon where it was important to tell kids that they're incredible and give them participation awards and always amplify their self-esteem as much as possible. The bastardized version of this and the really negative consequences, you have a cohort of men who have never experienced any kind of punishment, any kind of consequences, and a lot of that is cultural and often from a sort of maybe a mother that doesn't have the audacity to just punish her son. And you see this in non-white cultures more, actually. You see Arab and brown and men who look like me who are like this the most. And then they expect a woman who does everything. And it's like, you got to, even in a traditional way of doing things, the man then at least had to, there was a division of labor there where the man had certain expectations that they had to fulfill. Like at the very least, if you see a man who maybe expects a woman to fulfill those traditional gender roles, but then he has a really high-paying job and is really masculine and does all the physical work, at least then you can justify that as saying, all right, this is balanced. But when you see this kind of like chubby 30-plus-year-old who lives with his mum and is expecting to get this 10 out of 10 wife who does everything, it's like, bro, you are so delusional. How did you get to this point? This is a failure from the perspective of your parents and of society. And it triggers me because I'm part of that group. I'm a late 20s man and I am an ethnic man, and you do see a disproportionate degree of this kind of man-child behavior among ethnic men. It's uncomfortable, but it's also true. I remember watching this show where the host was talking about dating in different cultures, and this Asian woman was saying she just dates white men because the Asian men expect everything to be done while they play video games. Now that's an extreme example. I'm not trying to suggest that all Asian men are like that, but when you come from these more extended family-driven cultures, it doesn't bring the best out of men. And I actually think this goes back historically where, sort of the more Protestant individualism of the West actually had advantages for male behavior. Now, it also had some really horrendous disadvantages there where they were sometimes unrestricted in the expression of their masculinity, and that was really harmful for women. But it at least forced men to become probably the best version of themselves, because there isn't this extended family constantly validating them and constantly telling them they're perfect and that they don't have to do anything, and that by simply being a man, this goes back to, I guess, being the, holding on to the family name, and just by simply holding on to that, you are a king of sorts. And it is, in many ways, it's an outdated culture. And then when you have this more modern secular Western culture that is very respectful of other cultures and doesn't want to question other cultures, it sort of it denies any critique or criticism for this kind of behavior. And it's not good for anyone, because it's not good for them. The men aren't happy either, the men who are like this. And it's very hard to change when you're that far gone. When you're
it's
in your
so
late,
overwhelming.
Yeah,
to be like, I'm in my 20s and I haven't even started.
Yeah,
I don't have the money.
That's
don't
terrible.
have anything.
It's really, really bad. And it maybe I do need to think about whether just condemning this kind of behavior is the best strategy. But at the same time, that, I think, is what has caused that. The inability to, punish people and to have consequences for certain people. And it's it's bad. It's really bad. And it's definitely not good for women. Like, you talk to any ethnic millennial woman in Sydney, and she wants to date within her culture. In fact, women are actually more attracted to men of their race, ironically enough. Yeah. But she'll always articulate how hard it is dating men of her culture, because they're man babies. They think that they're being very masculine by essentially ordering her around, but she's not happy. And then you get this kind of stereotype of the crazy ethnic woman, which comes from the fact that she hasn't been able to have a sense of self. And she becomes crazy as a result, because, of course, you'd become crazy by this kind of chubby false king who's sitting there ordering me around. And at least, and like I said before, if he's a very high-earning businessman or something, you could probably justify that in saying, all right, I'll do all the emotional and physical labor at home because he's bringing in $300,000 a year. I don't think that's the best relationship at all. But at least you can then justify that to a certain degree. Yeah. But when it's a guy who's on a mediocre salary or can't even hold down a job, you think, well, what the hell is this? This is pathetic, and this guy needs to get his act together.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting perspective, or just thing to consider, is the cultural aspects of it. And like you said, I know girls I used to work with that were Muslim Arabic, and they dated these men, and they would do every single thing for them at home, and I would look at them and feel so sorry for them, like the emotional labor. They would tell me about their arguments, and I'd be like, oh, how could he say that? That's so stupid. Or how could he not see this anyway? And they would look at me though this is when I was single, and feel so sorry for me that I would be going out on Tinder dates and offering to pay for half of the meal, or offering to pay for all the meal. And they're like, girl, have some self-respect. Don't offer to pay. It's so interesting, the different perspective. And one of my friends told me, and I don't know if this is 100% accurate, this is just her voice, but she told me that in their culture, the husband works really hard, and she's like, I hold all his money. All the money comes to me, and I decide how we spend the money. In return, I look after the house, I look after the children, I do anything. So I don't consider that as so much, like you said, I don't consider that as a man baby, although the emotional immaturity, in my perspective, was a different, may have kind of teetered into that area a little bit. However, I saw this once in the making, and I talked about this years ago at the start of this podcast, I think, when we first started doing it. But I was once called out to a family where this kid who was maybe 8 or 9 years old hadn't been at school for literally months, which in Australia is illegal. It's considered educational neglect, and he wasn't enrolled for homeschooling or anything like that. So I get called out to this family, and it's an Asian family. And long story short, she was a single mother, although she did have a partner now, so a newish partner. But this kid couldn't get off the video games, that he would play 18 hours a day and then sleep for 6 hours and eat for an hour. And it got to the point where he demanded so much of his mother that she would create a menu for him every day, and he could select what lunch he might want, what breakfast he'd want, and what dinners he'd want. She'd have to bring it to him at his computer. He didn't leave his room. He literally didn't leave his room. She brought a bucket for him to go to the toilet into. She brought a kiddie pool for him to shower him in. And he wouldn't let her leave the room either. So he would make her sleep on the floor, without a bed, without a blanket, just straight on the floor if he went to sleep. And then during the day, she'd just be having to cook for him, clean for him, bathe him while he sat and gamed. And this kid was like 8 years old, literally. And we talked about the boundaries, how we're going to kind of ease him out, what we're going to do. And we made an action plan together. And she just said, no, I'm not doing it. She was like, it's in like, I have to do what he tells me.
Good
and
God.
I was trying to say, no, you don't. And she said, yes, I do. She said, you don't understand, but anything he tells me, I must do. This is so ingrained in me. And we had a lot of language barriers as well. So this is the essence of what she was telling me. But he, a year later, still doing the same things. She couldn't work. She couldn't make an income. So the other kind of area that I see this in when it comes to particularly white men or just Western men that are doing this or are man babies, I do see very frequently that it's with a single mother, and they kind of are compensating for the guilt of him not having a father figure, or maybe that he witnessed abuse or whatever. There's a lot of guilt there and a lot of shame. So she tries to compensate by doing everything for this kid. And it goes well into adulthood. There's so many times, probably every single day on Reddit, I see some mum posting saying, what can I do? My 24-year-old son, he's never worked. He's never had a job. He doesn't know how to drive. He doesn't know how to cook. He lives in my house. Like, what do I do to help him? And all the comments are like, this is your fault. Like, you enabled him. Why are you thinking of this now at 24? You could have been thinking of this at 17 when he dropped out of school or whatever. Why are you only intervening now when he's literally in his mid-20s with an almost fully developed brain?
It's too late at that point. It's not too late, but it's
much
hard
harder.
at that point.
Yeah. So much harder. And then finally, another little example of like the cultural side, I saw another post on Reddit I saw just the other day was this guy who thankfully wasn't a man child, but you could see how it could have stemmed into this. He came from, I can't remember, I know it was a cultural family, but I cannot for the life of me remember what culture it was. Or maybe he didn't say, but he did hint that it was a cultural family, cultural background. But he was bringing his girlfriend over to family. They had to go to the family house multiple times a week. And the mother would be testing the daughter to see that she would be efficient. So the mother would make the daughter cook everything, make her clean their parents' house to the point of she'd have to mop all the floors, mop all the bathrooms just for a weekly dinner. And the girlfriend started saying, I'm tired of doing this. I thought we were going over to socialize with your family and have a dinner. Like, why do I have to do everything when I get over there? So she said no. And then the family was outraged at her saying no, saying if she wants to be marrying my son, she needs to be cleaning our house and proving that she can do it. And thankfully, this guy was saying, I disagree with my parents. But he still didn't know how to do anything himself because he'd never actually been allowed to. So he might have wanted to learn to cook. He might have wanted to learn to do these things, but he literally wouldn't be allowed. So there's so many different kind of factors of it. And I guess in some places and sometimes you do have to hold some point of empathy. Imagine being a kid being absolutely refused, saying, no, you can't do this, just the way in the same way that, girls can be denied things all the time from their family, and especially in certain cultures. But when you talked about before as well, I do want to touch on like that we don't often see this in women. I do agree that it's much less frequent, but I think that we do see it. I especially have seen it in clients I've worked with, 18 to 21-year-old girls. Very frequently, you'd be surprised, probably actually more than guys that would have never done anything, dropped out of school, never been able to get a job, nothing, don't know how to even make tea, and yet they're anyway. But what I find the difference as well is in adulthood with women that are like this, is that when you're pretty, it's kind of cute if you just work one day a week at a cafe and you don't know how to do things, and then this man comes along and protects you and he doesn't mind, and it's not seemed as so unattractive as it is the other way around, which I find interesting. And I even saw on it was like making fun of like Tinder bios or something, or a website or Instagram, I don't know. It came up on it where this girl was saying, I won't do anything. I'm not going to cook. I'm not going to clean, and you have to pay for everything. And the guy reached out to her and was questioning it. And she's like, well, would you like a nice, humble, hardworking girl, or would you rather a high value girl that knows her worth? And he was like, actually, I would rather a humble, hardworking girl than you. But that was just the way that she had framed her complete incapacity to do anything as being high value and high worth. So I don't have to do anything, which is an interesting little caveat and change of perspective between the genders.
Yeah, no, that's the negative conception of the other side of it, where women expect the man to do everything and will then use that excuse, oh, he's a man baby. No, he just wants an equal partnership as well. And not everyone who says, oh, this man I've interacted with is a man baby, you don't have to take their word for it. You can inquire a bit further into that. And there are... again, I don't want to use dating shows as just the example for this, but this one's a bit more casual compared to the last podcast. That Mama's Boy show I ended up watching, and my God,
my favorite.
The brown mother is that's just cruel. That's just seriously abusive, and you find that in Asian, Arab, and Indian cultures where the mom just acts as a servant to the boy, and historically, if there were wars that had to be fought, if the men had to become these sorts of hyper-masculine warriors, well, that culture was then adaptive, because that was how you brought the best out of men and how you possibly created an elite fighting force that could then stave off the competitors. But now, when the standards for men aren't at that same level, but the standards of women are still at that level, well, you create this just completely idiotic man-child who can't do anything because he's never had to face any consequences in his life. And when you look at some of those statistics for single mothers with female children, there's the last I read, there was no difference between the outcomes of women who grew up with a single mother versus with two parents, or very limited differences. And when you controlled for other things like economic factors, those differences were far less pronounced. And however, when you had men who grew up with single mothers versus men who grew up with a biological father in the household, the outcomes are vastly different. Men with single mothers are more likely to engage in crime, less likely to complete high school. They're also less likely to perform well at logic-based subjects like mathematics and science, but then they found, ironically, better performing at literature-based subjects. So that was one aspect where a man with a single mother could have benefited. But the theory, I was watching someone break this down, and his theory was that, when you have the father is more likely to enforce harsher restrictions and teach a boy how to harness his more masculine inclinations, such as the ability to think more logically and rationally. And it's not to say women don't have that ability. I'm not saying that at all. But, coordinate themselves in a way that's cognizant of the time and not always be just focused on their inner world and their inner selves and what they want to do in that moment. And then there's also harsher boundaries that are often enforced by the father. And I'm sure, as you would know, a woman's body when she's given birth is just changes fundamentally to purely just protect and care for that child. And then for her to, if she's a single mother, for her to take on that caring maternal role and that more masculine, boundary-driven role is a very hard ask, and that is a negative consequence of the highly liberated society that we do live in. And in most situations where there is a single mother, a lot of accountability has to be put towards the biological father, because there's a lot of instances where he just didn't want to be the father or just didn't care. But then there are instances as well where, the mother is like the aforementioned example that you articulated, where she's just treating him like a king and just allowing him to play video games. And, there's speaking maybe more from the modern Caucasian culture here, in comedy videos, there's a trope that's often expressed in very funny ways about how white boys will just swear to their mom with no consequences. I remember first seeing this from Russell Peters, where he's telling a story about how he went to his white friend Ryan's house, and then Ryan's mom told him to do something, and he just goes, "Fuck you, mom!" And God, she's such a bitch. And he's just there in utter shock, because any ethnic person who ever tried to do that to their mom would be belted, absolutely belted. And so you get that mother who will cook for you and will do all these things for you, and sometimes act as a pseudo servant, but at the same time she will not refrain from being violent and extraordinarily aggressive if you disrespect her. Whereas
that's so funny.
maybe I'm not saying, obviously this doesn't apply to every single white person or anything like that, but I wonder if post-cultural revolution, there's sort of been a bit more of a lax approach to parenting in the West that wasn't necessarily experienced in Eastern or Arab or African cultures, and that manifests in a different kind of man baby, probably a more entitled man baby, if anything, who just can't do anything and will respond aggressively, verbally, if there is any challenge made to their worldview or their sense of self, or their attributes or lack of action on a given on some sort of issue within the relationship. And then you get more of the traditional cultural man babies who have potentially had a overbearing mother and a culture that has expected more of them historically, but because we live in a very safe world that doesn't necessarily need a lot of behaviors that men maybe have an inherent biological advantage in, they just become essentially a man without a purpose and aimless. And then those behaviors actually make it worse. And if you're already low in testosterone, you engage in behaviors that further exacerbate the fall in your testosterone. And if you play video games and eat junk food all day, that's not going to help you. That's not going to compel you to become a better version of yourself. Whereas if you're engaging in behaviors that are beneficial to your male hormones and your sense of purpose and identity, that will actually work as it will just sort of beget more of those behaviors. When you're higher in testosterone, you actually are compelled to be competitive, and you're compelled to challenge yourself. And that doesn't happen for men who are low in testosterone and just low in basic health because they eat junk food all day. And like we talked about on the last podcast, there's often this idea that I'm struggling, I'm gone through this thing. And then you sometimes, not in all situations, you inquire further. What's this thing that you're struggling with? I went through a breakup 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, come on, man. Like, that was 6 years ago. That's a situation where it's like, all right, no, put those feelings down and go do something. Yeah. That's a situation where what could be described as, maybe toxic masculinity would be appropriate, in my opinion. It's it's a sad situation because it's affecting society. It's making women annoyed and not particularly inspired by the opposite gender, which is not a good thing. That's what contributes to a lot of these TikTok trends and female comedians talking about how men are trash, and in a lot of situations it is. And then women don't want to be the best versions of themselves if men aren't the best versions of themselves. So why would a woman want to, if you've got this traditional cultural idea, a woman should always dress well and do this and always want to have sex with me, and you're this like fat slob who doesn't have anything interesting to say, well, how's she going to fake that sexual interest all the time, man? You got to maintain that desire. And if you challenge yourself to be the best version of yourself, well, a good partner will be along the ride with you. And they just don't understand that. They can't see that.
Yeah. I think, well, actually, I'll get to that point in a bit. But firstly, what you said about, the lack of a father figure and the impact long-term is so true and interesting. And I think when you're talking about the guy that you watched that kind of debriefed it and talked about why, I feel, in my opinion, it's less because of the way that, or what's lacking from the mother's parenting, like more strict boundaries or anything. I would say it's more because of the father wound and thinking about why did my father leave me or what was he like. And I only, say that based on my experience working with children in care, especially boys, who are desperate to know who their dads are. And even when they were put into a house a home with a male and female foster carers or whatever, desperate to know who was their father, what was he like, what did he do, why did he leave me, why didn't he come back, why didn't he do this? It's that wound that was left is so strong and impactful, regardless of the fact that they had this male figure raising them since the age of 1, where that's all they've known. They still want to know about the biological father, which in Australia the laws are every child has to be told and have a very strong understanding of their life story, know why they're in care and what happened and what their history was, which I completely agree with. So it's not like they just, even though this kid was raised or these boys were raised by these other men and may even call them mum and dad, or may soon get adopted or have guardianship from this family, they still really need to know. It's so inherent and it's such a deep part of their personality and their sense of identity comes from that. And of course they want to know a little bit about their mum, but it seems, in my experience, it seemed that you could give them information on their mum and they'd be kind of satisfied with it, but the boys are always just like more about my dad, find my dad, trying to find them on Facebook themselves. And the girls it was the other way around. They wanted to know what their mum was like. They wanted to see their mum regardless of, what abuse they'd endured. And boys want to see their mum too, but the thing is that mums are actually more likely, in almost all cases, the mothers were still seeing their children that were with foster families, whereas the dads wouldn't. So I think that's a little interesting, factor as well, is that it could just be like, what wound is that leaving? And we may not see it from the other side because it's less likely that a woman leaves her babies. Of course it happens at times, but it's less likely that, you don't know who your mum is and you're raised by your dad. So we don't really have much we couldn't say too much about what the long-term impact of that is, except in the cases of foster care system and out-of-home care. So yeah, that's the other thing that you kind of mentioned on the end there was, I think one of the most important factors is that it is everything I learned in sexology and relationship therapy is that if you are having to be basically a mother to your partner and you're doing everything and looking after him, that is the biggest killer of a sex life. And it actually goes hand in hand. You might find that it's not necessarily just that she doesn't want you, but you might find that you actually subconsciously start not wanting her over the years when she's taking on a mothering role, and you might find her bickering with you or being critical or resentful, and that's a turn off. Whereas she's turned off because she no longer sees you as an independent, masculine, or just, I guess it doesn't matter. You can be turned on by a masculine man or a feminine man, but she might not see you as a person worthy of or equal to her. She sees you as someone that she has to look after like another kid. How many times have you heard women joke about her having 3 kids when she's actually got 2 kids and a husband? So that is by far the biggest killer to the sex life. And I highly recommend, and I talk about this all the time, and I lend this book out 1,000 times to every single person I know. I bought like 10 copies because I keep lending it out. But that book, Come As You Are, by Emily something Nagoski or something like that, is so fascinating and so true to the way that all these little balances in your life, especially like emotional burdens, physical burdens, habits, emotional maturity, conversation, communicate, affects the sex life, particularly of women. So if you're a man-child and you're questioning why someone doesn't want to have sex with you, there's your answer. And you might eventually up and leave her and get someone else. And you're going to go through the same cycle over and over and over again until you change that. And unfortunately, this seems unfair and unequal, but in the cases that a woman has, well, I'm just going to say an attractive woman, also doesn't do anything, doesn't work, doesn't earn any money, doesn't know how to drive or do anything for herself, that actually doesn't impact the sex life in terms of the men's attractiveness to her. It can at times, but not as drastically. But however, if that woman isn't deemed as physically attractive, then it absolutely has almost the same impact as well, which is interesting. But also we know, we've talked about this a million times, that how important physical attraction is, particularly to men in majority of cases, not in all, and maybe not even in most, but in majority. You
are correct. And what I would say for men in that situation who complain about how women have it easier and are not held to the same standard of life skills and ability to provide resources, well, that's not going to help your situation. Let's say that those pretty girls no longer are held to the standard based on their looks. That still doesn't change the fact that you're a man-child. So is that what you want? Is that what you want? You want just a woman who does everything and sees you as hot, and therefore you don't have to do anything? That sounds like a pretty shit life anyway. So I wouldn't engage in that kind of complaining behavior there. And I forgot what I was going to say, but I was going to say something similar to that. Completely mind blanked on that. But I think if you're going to sort of constantly complain about society without doing anything, that's not going to help you. And it is true that I think society has to be held accountable and culture has to be held accountable for creating these kind of man babies. But at the same time, there's a responsibility that is on you. And I think you should internalize the fact that all the responsibility is on you to solve this issue. And you got to be really harsh with yourself. If you don't have that harsh general/father figure telling you what to do and keeping you in line, you've got to become that for yourself. And that's not easy.
Yeah.
I didn't have a very strict or harsh father, because from what I've been told, my grandfather was like that, and my dad wanted to be a very modern man who never sort of told his son to be tough or anything like that, which is probably what you're going to get a lot more of now. I guess I was a generation early in experiencing that. But you can't go too far either way. You can't be that officious father who never shows any love or affection to their children, but you cannot be the boundaryless father as well, who is always indulging in their emotions at any given time. You have to be both. You have to be the good cop and the bad cop. You have to be the benevolent father and the harsh disciplinarian father, depending on the situation. And look, I'm saying this more so as a father figure, and we're talking about it if you are just in any position of authority here, because I'm not a father, so it's probably not right for me to be saying all of this. But I'm just talking about a man in any position of authority with other men there as their subordinates. And yeah, I that is also infuriating when you hear about the girls who sort of have that level of entitlement because they're attractive. But that's right. That's what I was going to say. On an evolutionary basis, it does make sense because
Yeah.
a woman doesn't have to provide resources. In fact, it's probably not beneficial for her, for a tribe or a population to depend on women providing the maximum amount of resources, because the burden of bearing children and giving birth is so intense that it's far more beneficial for the men to be providing those resources and protection and security, while the women prioritize the birthing process and prioritize the care of the infant. So there are underlying physiological factors that likely contribute to certain women potentially feeling more entitled, because biologically they are the one that is going to bear the child, and more likely than not children. And it makes sense that the man has to then showcase the ability to provide resources and care and physical security, but the new one is also emotional security. I watched a Teal Swan video about men expressing their emotions. Do we do it or do we not? Because a lot of times we're hearing one message but then experiencing negative consequences if we engage in the actions that are expected of us in a modern context. So a lot of men will talk about how I did express my feelings and it blew up in my face. The girlfriend or the partner or the people around me told me that it was either unattractive or, not masculine, or just not the ideal choice of behavior in a given moment. And her argument was that what women want from men is a sense of masculine, she calls it masculine containment. So the example she gave, if I remember correctly, was that if a wife sees her husband cry when he sees a puppy or when there's a baby, that's really attractive because it shows that he might be empathetic and that he can observe beauty and vulnerability and see that in a very, beautiful way. Whereas if his emotions make her feel less safe, or if his emotions make her feel like she has to then do more of the emotional labor, that's when it becomes a turn-off for her. Yeah. And an example for that would be something like, I can't work right now at this point in my life, and these are the feelings associated with that. Now, it's contextual here because someone could be going through some really harsh things in their personal life or have some sort of issue that they have to bear with. But if a partner hears that, she's going to be empathetic in the moment, but the underlying message is, I cannot provide security for you right now. Or in a more emotional context, I'm upset at something you did or something you said, and again, she might go into care mode and feel a lot of empathy for you in that given moment. But the underlying physiology is that, all right, this man might be particularly sensitive over certain things, and how does that affect his ability to provide me with emotional security? And so there's a lack of safety that comes with that. Tell me if that makes sense and if you agree.
Yeah, I definitely agree in most parts. Yes, I think that point about the emotional safety, like, are you made to feel safe, is so true. And I do agree kind of about the other aspect of, when someone comes to you and it's, they're putting their burden on you. But at the same point, every woman I know, or no, that's too dramatic, but a lot of women I know, and especially women like myself, will happily take the burden on of others and often not feel drained by it or not get resentment unless it's continual over years and years and years and imbalanced. So in some ways, I don't necessarily agree 100% with that. And we do say a lot in this podcast as well about, men that when they experience opening up to women or their partners, and they kind of get that shut down rejection and the impact of that. But I would say that this happens equally to women, maybe not equally, but still a lot of amount of times to women as well, where they open up and then we get told we're being dramatic, we're emotional, like we're hysterical, all these things. And, I hate to reference, everyone gets mad when we talk about maths when it comes up every year, but there's such a good example. And maths means married at first sight, because there's always one person that's like, what the fuck is maths and why do they keep talking about it? But there's this one couple, I can't remember their names, but there's the builder, the fuckboy builder, and the girl he married, and she was really upset about something that was justified. Oh, basically, he kept telling her, "You're so sexy. I just want to jump over this table and fuck you." Like, he's so turned on by her, and they're both really attractive people. And then the next day they shoot them, and she says, "We had sex, and it's been weird ever since." And then he said, when they talked to him, they were like, "Yeah, we had sex last night, and I'm no longer attracted to her. And this is an experiment when you get married." So she's obviously really upset about this. And the question that comes up at dinner is, "Do you find me attractive?" And she says, "Yeah, I find you really attractive, especially when we met. There were such great sparks." And then he was like, "Yeah, I don't find you attractive." And I was saying, I immediately turned to Adrian and I was like, imagine being told how sexy you are and how hot you are and how much you want it. And then the second you have sex, being told, "I no longer find you attractive." That would shatter me. And she got upset and she quietly sat there with a tear rolling down her eyes. And then he's like, "I don't get all these hysterics." Like, and I was like, oh my God, that's such a lack of empathy and a lack of perception and understanding there. So it definitely happens both ways. And
Very true, yeah.
I think that, I guess everything happens both ways almost. Well, a lot of things do happen both ways, and that we have to kind of recognize that and keep that in our mind. What I do want to say, though, is that it does have an impact when you take on the burden, hence what I said before about it impacting your sex life so drastically. And my advice, because you touched on this as well a little bit, about how you have to start doing that work on yourself. Treat it as you are the problem. And I do see a lot of family therapists or therapists that have, they kind of have two schools of thoughts when clients come to them, because very frequently we'll have a client come to us, and how many times have I heard someone blame, and I'm using the word blame specifically rather than explain or describe or whatever, but blame everything that's ever happened to them on what occurred during their childhood or their mother or their father or something like that. And a lot of therapists take the school of thought where they should really validate that and understand that and say, yes, like you were dealt these, issues or this hand because of your parents. Whereas the other hand is like, no parent is perfect. All parents are flawed. Although, there are those outliers that are really, really flawed, in which case this does not include that, where it's abuse, trauma, or neglect. But all parents are flawed. No parents are perfect. And if you had a relatively normal childhood, maybe you shouldn't be blaming your parents for everything, and you should start looking at what you can do for yourself and taking responsibility for yourself. And I think that's and really, really trying to exclude here situations of abuse and trauma. But if it's just a standard childhood, let's not blame your parents for everything. And I think that's important if you're a man child listening to this, and your mum's let you stay in her basement or whatever up until 25, it's still your responsibility to get out there and do something. However, I think before you start going and finding jobs and getting your license and things like that, you really do have to do some inner work and get a therapist first and foremost. Because if you just go, I'm going to enroll in a job, I'm going to do this and this, the first time someone tells you no 2 days into your job, or tells you something you don't like, or you have to do something you're uncomfortable with or you've never done before, you might get flustered, you might get overwhelmed, you might get anxious, and you'll quit. And then you're going to be stuck in this perpetual cycle of wanting to escape, wanting to progress, but then being met with a barrier and not knowing how to approach it or overcome it. So I think that was why therapy is so essential. And if you're a woman listening to this that is dating a man-child, do not do that work for them. It is not your responsibility for you to teach that person how to develop emotional intelligence, how to develop a maturity, how to become more ambitious or anything. Send that person to therapy. Put ultimatums in place, or not ultimatums, but put boundaries in place. And what might you be doing that are accidentally enabling them? If you are asking someone to can you do this, pick up this laundry, or can you fix this door? And then 2 weeks later, it's not done. And out of, passive aggressiveness and just desperation, you go and do it yourself. You're relying on this perceived understanding that they'll feel empathetic and feel bad that you had to go and fix that door yourself. But that might not happen, and it likely won't happen. You're further enabling them that you will end up doing every task yourself. So I think that that's really important, that we can't project empathy and think, if I just complain about this or communicate this and whatever, he'll understand or he'll feel bad. If he's not changing or she's not changing, it's therapy or it's nothing. That would be my advice, because you're going to be stuck in this cycle forever, especially if you're trying to change it yourself. You can't change someone else's cycle. Either they change it themselves or you tell them they need therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. And therapy will cater to the emotional side of things, but then I do think these men in these situations have to go through some tough circumstances, actually, because I know in my life the ways that I really took responsibility for what were man-child behaviors was when I had to endure the consequences of those man-child behaviors. And if you sit there in a sheltered place online all day, you're never going to actually experience the negative consequences of the identity that you've built for yourself. So look, it's likely that you're going to have a tough road ahead of you, and you will maybe get broken up with, and you will experience a lot of hardship. But hardship is the catalyst, more often than not, for you to become the best version of yourself. And on a very basic level, it's important to just have enough of a knowledge of basic housework stuff, and also just basic conversational skills, which that actually is a societal problem. When kids are now just playing video games all day and on social media, yeah, of course they're going to be socially awkward as they get older. I think that is something that is, again, you don't sit there blaming your parents, but yeah, if you're in your 20s and you can't maintain eye contact and hold a conversation with someone, it's not impossible, but it's something that you should have developed from a young age, and that the society should have just developed for you. So there are a lot of societal issues at play here, but things that you can do. Okay, learn basic grooming. It's really not that hard. There's something a father should have done. Teach you how to shave. I know I had to shave from 13. So I've known how to do that for a very long time. And look, you don't have to have the most immaculate beard or facial hair out there, but just look presentable, okay? Comb your hair. Just the fact that these things have to be said, it's really embarrassing. But look.
More importantly, like personal intimate hygiene, I think.
Yeah.
It's shocking how little people even know about that. How many times have you seen on Reddit a guy saying he doesn't wash his ass because it's gay, or he just didn't do it because he didn't know he was supposed to? Things like that's just...
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Oh, God.
Yeah, well, I haven't heard that one, but my God.
I have definitely heard of that. Yeah.
Learn, look, if your mother did all the traditionally feminine duties like ironing and washing, just learn that. It doesn't take long, okay? You don't have to be perfect with everything you do as well, but just learn how to iron.
Yeah.
You see a lot of guys with crinkled T-shirts and you think, well, it's not hard to do that. Okay, this is not a societal factor. This is you, okay? Buy an iron, learn how to do it. Learn basic cooking. You don't need to be a chef. Just learn basic cooking. Learn how to do a few pasta dishes, a few just basic meat dishes. get a good salad going. All right. You do not need to be Gordon Ramsay here. You just need to know the basics. Have a routine of some sort. Have just a basic routine. Learn how to organize yourself. Conduct yourself in a manner that's appropriate to the time that you have. And basic fashion. Do not need to buy expensive suits, Gucci clothes, or anything like that. But just look neat, look presentable. It's really, I find like the most masculine aspects of society and the most maybe feminine male aspects of society are the ones that are the best at this, right? So you see a guy who's been in the military, he has his bed done at 5 a.m. and he's very neat in his presentation and his hair and probably does know how to cook basic things and is very resourceful. And then you look at, well, a lot of gay guys and they're the most fashionable. They are very competent with these sorts of things. And, you know, that it's these men in the middle who just don't know how to do this stuff. And so, you know, it's not gay because the most masculine guys are doing it and the most maybe the men who don't have those masculine traits are doing it. It's you in the middle who's not doing it. So I think you just got to learn the basics here. And you got to stop with these narratives of, oh, you know, women don't want me because I'm not earning 300 grand a year. No, dude, women don't want you because you play video games all day and you can't hold a conversation and you can only eat 2-minute noodles. And sure, there are now societal issues where you look at some of these statistics where, okay, there is maybe this hypergamous gaze that a lot of more educated women have where they only want a man who earns more than them and they only want a man who's above 6 foot. And there are these things like that, which are now there's a bit more research being done into it. And it also, again, makes sense on an evolutionary basis that a woman would sort of, because the investment for a man in terms of child rearing is very limited, can be very limited, historically speaking. A man could technically impregnate, 365 women a year, probably even more, but a woman can only get pregnant once every 9 months maximum. Yeah. And as a result, they're going to have, physiologically, there's a mechanism there to really aspire to the best possible mate. And social media and online dating has exacerbated that. So, look, it's true that there are societal issues at play, but don't sit there and blame that for everything because there's a lot of things that you could probably do that you're not doing, and you need to take accountability for that. And you can't just sit there and blame what happened in your childhood. You can't just sit there and blame what happened in your last relationship. There are points in your life where you should tell that story, where you should be open and vulnerable about those things, but there are also points in your life where you can't let that control you. And sometimes you do have to be in control of your feelings and sometimes push them down on the days that you don't want to go to work, that you don't want to go to the gym, that you don't want to cook that healthy meal. Well, those are the times where you got to have the discipline to do it. And that accumulates over the course of many little actions across the day, which means many habits that you develop across the weeks and months, which creates a better identity for you over the course of years. And, you know, really think about who you want to be in 10 years and then think about the minute little details of your day and the behaviors you need to engage in to get to that person. Because if you're doing the stereotype, if you're sitting there and, you know, you're not grooming yourself and you're playing video games and you're online all day, well, you're not going to get to that best version of yourself. And the one thing I probably will say at the end is like, all right, if you live at home, there are economic issues at play today where that can be justified. So as long as you got a plan, especially if you live in a big city and you're at home, I think that can be forgivable in particular contexts. So maybe I won't, you know, it's not fair to be as critical on that issue. But
for sure. Yeah. And also just know what resources are within your reach is I think the most important, because I often forget to reflect on, we often talk about like neurotypical heterosexual people in our podcast. And I think now if someone is neurodivergent, that they may have more barriers to remembering personal hygiene or understanding, you know, social conversations and things like that, in which case you should reach out to what resources are available to you, which in Australia in particular, there's a lot. to get you on that same track that what Neel was just talking about as well. And for anyone, you know, those resources might be the NDIS, it might be therapy, it might be caseworkers, it might be care workers, it could be coaches, anything, life coaches, who knows. But get resources that are within your reach rather than relying on your person that you're in a relationship with to, or your mother or parent to kind of push you along. And like Neel was saying, that work needs to be done independently at most of the time, at least at majority. So best of luck.
Absolutely right. And then the other one I would say is basic handyman skills as well. If you can learn how to change a tire, how to change a light bulb. You don't need to, you don't need to have the skills of a tradie. I mean, this is the one aspect I'm probably the least proficient at, but I know how to change a tire. I know how to change a light bulb. I know how to do just basic drilling and, tool work. But to be fair, that's probably the one I need to get better at. But, when you live in an apartment and you're an artist in Sydney, there's other things that you can lean on there. But
exactly.
Yeah. Basic handyman skill, or handy person, we should say, in 2023. Basic handy person skills will... in fact, my mum taught me that, ironically enough. Also. Yeah, mum taught me how to do all of that stuff. So go talk to my mum. She'll teach you. Yeah, she's the opposite of those ethnic mothers. She's the complete opposite. Once I was like, as a joke, "Oh, mum, you got to go find me an Indian wife." She's like, "Fuck off, go find your own wife."
I love her.
Yep. So, definitely gave me they gave me a much more Western upbringing. We'll say that. And I think that's actually, I got the best of both worlds. I got the kind of individualism of the West without, sometimes the self-obsession and the hedonism that comes with it. But I also got the, academic inclination of the, I guess, upper class Indian culture and the strictness there, but without the pressure the extended family being ashamed at every little thing that I do. So I'm really grateful actually for the upbringing I had.
Aww.
So shout out to the old mum and dad. I don't think they listen they listen like every 4 or 5, I think. But
my dad started listening and it stresses me.
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't want them to listen. I know she listened to like 1 or 2 and she had a few things to say, but that's as any mother would. So there you go. But another thing, this would be worthwhile to do another podcast on is if society doesn't get its act together as well as these, man babies, you are just looking at more men who are going to fall for your Andrew Tate type figures because it gives them a sense of heroism when, being personally accountable doesn't give you that. It's not as heroic to sit there and learn how to cook than it is to say fight for a cause that'll be for the betterment of society. And so there's something to be said about like large collective political and cultural narratives that are also contributing to this. But that's a completely other podcast, and I think we'll end this one here. And Eliza, I hope you go get some sleep. And
thanks.
I don't know if you will, but good luck. Yeah. And I hope everyone else is doing well. YouTube.com/@SexSellsPodcast. Make sure you subscribe and watch the video, comment, share. We're going to start posting some more highlights again. So follow the Instagram and the TikTok. And thanks for listening/watching, guys. See you next time.
See you next week.